oil riches, and risks, in tiny African nation. With no luck at all, the Spaniards and then the French long searched for oil in the waters around this tiny nation, half of which sits on the Central African mainland and half on an island in the Atlantic. Then suddenly in 1996, after Spanish and French oilmen had left, the Americans struck liquid gold. The discovery was so unexpected that the State Department, in a cost-cutting measure, had closed its embassy in Equatorial Guinea several weeks earlier and had begun handling relations with this economic backwater from its embassy in neighboring Cameroon. The embassy has yet to reopen, but American investments here are now estimated at nearly $5 billion. The figure would rank this obscure nation fourth in American investments in sub-Saharan Africa, behind only more familiar places like South Africa and the two oil giants, Nigeria and Angola. They said there was no interest and no possibility of finding oil in Equatorial Guinea. Cristobal Manana, the country's Minister of Mines and Energy, said of the earlier exploration companies. But we were very optimistic about our geology. We knew it was logical that if Nigeria was producing, Cameroon was producing and Gabon was producing, here in Equatorial Guinea we could be producing. Here in the capital, which is groaning under the weight of an influx of foreigners, there is heady talk of Equatorial Guinea, population 465,000, becoming a Kuwait of Africa. There is also an acute awareness that the same term was applied decades ago to countries like Gabon, which despite a small population and huge oil reserves remains dependent on foreign aid because of mismanagement and corruption. So Equatorial Guinea stands at a crossroad. Significant oil production started 2 years ago, and it will be 2 more before the government's coffers begin filling with piles of cash unimaginable until now. People in Africa and the West will watch closely what the government does with its money, and how the oil companies, especially ExxonMobil, the main producer, operate here. The scrutiny will be greater than it has been elsewhere because Equatorial Guinea's oil production comes when governments and human rights organizations in the West have rallied around the reality that Africa's riches, diamonds or oil, have seldom improved the lives of average Africans and often enriched only corrupt African leaders and their Western partners. Indeed, African oil has perhaps never been as politicized as it is now, as suggested by the fierce debates about the World Bank's endorsement of $3.7 billion Australian pipeline between Chad and Cameroon. In an interview, Mr. Manana, who was accompanied by Gabriel Malema, the Secretary of State at the Ministry of Mines and Energy and the son of Equatorial Guinea's President, Teodoro Obiang Nguema, said the government had already held a conference to examine how and why its neighbors had squandered their oil dollars, to evaluate what to do not to have the same thing happen here. An international development official who has been in Equatorial Guinea for 3 years said there had been some positive changes. The government and the country are much more open to the outside than when I first arrived here, the official said. But so far there have been few positive effects on the lives of Equatorial Guineans. That has been the case for all of Central Africa. A country's natural resources are regarded as the patrimony of the head of state. We'll have to wait and see if things will be different here. The outside interest will be a big change for Equatorial Guinea, which long remained severely isolated for a number of reasons. Its capital lies on an island connected to the mainland only by irregular flights, most of them aboard rickety second-hand Soviet-era planes. As the only sub-Saharan country to have been colonized by Spain, its Spanish-speaking citizens are surrounded by people who speak French or English. And then its first post-independence president, Francisco Macias Nguma, ruled with a brutality comparable to that of tyrants like Idi Amin of Uganda, driving a third of the population into exile. He was overthrown in 1979 and executed by a government led by his nephew, the current president, Mr. Obiang.